Tenant Bahal, guardians of the city, why have you forsaken us to these demons? Such were the desperate prayers of the Carthaginians who faced Rome's final assault upon their capital in 146 BC. For 3 long years, the city had held out against all odds. Though stripped of its armies, its fleets, and its weapons of war at the start of the conflict, Carthage had fought back with the ferocity of a lion. No inch of ground was yielded without a fight. No assaults went unanswered without a counterattack. No act of daring was unmatched by staunch resolve. In this way, the Carthaginians had held their ground and even threatened to destroy the invaders outright on multiple occasions. But alas, against the crushing might of Rome and its brilliant commander, Scipio Aemilianus, their efforts were ultimately in vain. Starved of food, of soldiers, and of hope, the legions finally broke into the city. Yet even then, the lion roared in defiance. What followed would be one of the most brutal chapters of urban warfare ever recorded in antiquity. From avenues to courtyards, bedrooms, and rooftops, the sons and daughters of Bahal Hammon refused to yield to Rome's advance all the way to the inner sanctum of the Acropolis. This is the story of the heroic last stand of Carthage. In 146 BC, Scipio Aemilianus had been honored with an extension to his command of the legions in Africa. He had but one mandate to terminate the siege of Carthage. Thus it was that in the spring his troops had waged twin assaults upon the vestiges of the city's defenses, one thrust aiming for the Bursa citadel and the other aiming for the Chthon harbor. The latter of these had proved most fruitful, the defenses on this front having been softened by heavy fighting the prior fall. As the Romans pushed into this flank of the city, it began to cave. Years of attritional fighting and starvation were showing their toll upon the defenders who struggled to hold back the tide. Along the merchant docks, Hasdrubal had resorted to arson to slow the invaders. Meanwhile, within the military docks, desperate Carthaginians attempted to pile up barricades as quickly as they were being torn down. But it was not enough. Finally, after 3 long years, the great dam of Carthage was about to burst. As the fires abated and the timbers collapsed, the legions now poured into the city. First came Lullius's contingent. On their own initiative, these had penetrated into the military harbor. Brushing aside feeble, starving defenders, they now took the first steps within a city which had for so long denied them. Now the soldiers flowed across the harbor's circular interior, cutting down all who yet remained in the facilities. As they advanced, they would have had to clear each of the ship sheds. While many were empty, others likely hosted the skeletal remains of the fleet Carthage had hastily assembled the previous winter, their parts long since having been salvaged for other purposes. Though of no military value, these still might have served as refuge for Punic defenders who had not managed to find the exits fast enough. Perhaps their best hope was to hide away and shelter from the coming storm. However, none would have been spared in the adrenaline-fueled rampage of the troops. For now, this fury was confined to the perimeter of the docks as night was fast approaching. Thus it was that Scipio's contingent, which had similarly been wading through the wreck of the merchant harbor, was forced to halt its advance. They did so in the center of the nearby forum. On this open ground, the legions established a perimeter of guards, while the main body hunkered down for the night under full arms. Few would have been able to sleep, their veins coursing with the adrenaline of fear and anticipation. Here they were, after years of anticipation, laying in the very heart of Carthage. Its twinkling lights sparkled around them, seemingly as numerous as the stars. For this fleeting moment, an eerie stillness came upon the world. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians would have spent an equally restless night. Gathering in their windows or on their roofs, the citizens peered out into the dark, squinting to confirm the whispers which were spreading like wildfire. They are here. The Romans are inside the city. It's hard to imagine what one would have done in this situation. The gravity of the moment must have saturated the air with an intoxicating miasma of dread. Likely many prayed to their gods for mercy or salvation. Others took actions into their own hands. Militias rounded up the able-bodied while passages were barricaded and doorways boarded up as a final line of protection. Those unfit to fight, meanwhile, crammed provisions into sacks and prepared to make a break for it, either seeking refuge in some distant corner of the city or atop the defensive heights of the Bursa Hill. In an urban environment as vast as Carthage, there would have been anywhere to run, but nowhere to hide. As dawn broke, the Roman army began to stir. However, for now, the Carthaginians would be granted a momentary stay of execution. It seems that the waking legionaries had their thoughts drift from guarded battlements to unguarded temples. Thus, as 4,000 fresh troops were brought into the city to join them for the assault, a sudden mutiny of greed gripped their ranks. First in drips, then in droves, the Roman army disintegrated into a mob, which began to ransack the surrounding area. Ion reports, quote, "They entered the Temple of Apollo, whose statue was there covered with gold, in a shrine of beaten gold weighing 1,000 talents, which they plundered, chopping it with their swords, disregarding the commands of their officers, until they had divided it among themselves." Such fits of disorder were a common occurrence among soldiers, especially those who had finally reached a breakthrough in a long siege. It seems that this was fueled by both the cathartic release of tension and the fear of missing out on a chance to get rich. In either case, the loss of discipline could prove dangerous, and there are numerous records of pillaging troops having been slaughtered by traps and counterattacks on such occasions. It was for this reason that the later Roman army would enact strict bans on looting and methodically collect the spoils for redistribution so that soldiers felt assured they would get their share of the prize. In this case, it seems that it would be the officers and Scipio's iron will which finally rallied the troops. With a mound of treasures gathered in the enemy's form and the Acropolis as a backdrop, we can imagine how this charismatic commander may have addressed the men. "Sons of Mars, what doubts have you in victory and in spoils? It was you who summoned me to this task. Have I not kept my words to you in these long years? Have I not led you in valor and in honor? Now I summon you to follow me. The greatest glories yet await us atop the heights to arms. We have beaten them before, and when they see our weapons and feel our spirits, they will crack. Forget about this meager plunder. Win and you shall have it all." Thus refocused in purpose, the legions advanced against the Bursa. It was an ancient bastion strengthened by a natural hill, the city's oldest walls in a dense urban landscape. Here we are told that 3 main streets led from the Forum to the fortress. These were flanked by tightly packed 6-story apartment complexes. Within were the defenders who had turned such structures into fortified towers. From the windows and the roofs, they now hurled insults and missiles at the approaching Romans. Some attempt was made to advance through the maelstrom. However, this was quickly halted. The Romans now targeted the first of these tall buildings led by centurions. Small bodies of troops swarmed through the colonnades of their ground floors. As in Rome, these street-level spaces would have been filled with market stalls, bakeries, shops, and other small businesses. However, these would have already been stripped clear by this point in the siege, leaving the troops nothing of value to get their hands on. Any surviving defenders would have sought refuge at top higher ground, firing as they went or dropping heavy objects upon the intruders. Ultimately, the brawl culminated in fighting atop the very roof of the building. A desperate last stand was made in full view of the city. From neighboring heights, the defenders lent support as best they could. But soon the last of the holdouts was slain. One building down, dozens to go. But the true prize was the building itself. Thus the Romans would have sought out the narrow winding staircases which led up to higher levels. Here is where resistance would have proved stiff. Defenders must have barricaded the passages and set up traps to hamper the assailants. Pushing through such tight quarters while encumbered with full armor, helmets, and shields would have proved even more difficult. Perhaps troops stripped down for breaching efforts, or even set up ladders to clamber through windows to bypass this first hurdle. Whatever the case, it seems that they could not be stopped. As the Romans spilled out into the upper levels, fighting would have devolved into a chaotic close-quarters brawl. Here the struggle was deeply personal, taking place face-to-face in the very bedrooms of the Carthaginians. As this wave of violence slowly filled the building, when they had mastered the first, they threw timbers from one to the other over the narrow passageways and crossed as on bridges. While war was raging in this way on the roofs, another fight was going on among those who met each other in the streets below. All places were filled with groans, shrieks, shouts, and every kind of agony. Some were stabbed, others were hurled alive from the roofs to the pavement, some of them lighting on the heads of spears or other pointed weapons or swords. No one dared to set fire to the houses on account of those who were still on the roofs until Scipio reached the Bracera. It's at this point that the Roman commander reformed his troops to take the Acropolis in what would become a siege within a siege. The attackers first found out to surround the fortifications. Next, orders were given to set fire to the surrounding structures, both to burn out any last defenders and to clear a path for the army's advance. The devastation of this mass arson should not be underestimated. Here Ion brings color to the nightmare. Then came new scenes of horror as the fire spread and carried everything down. The soldiers did not wait to destroy the buildings little by little, but all in a heap. So the crashing grew louder and many corpses fell with the stones into the midst. Others were seen still living, especially old men, women, and young children who had hidden in the inmost nooks of the houses. Some of them wounded, some more or less burned and uttering piteous cries. Still others thrust out and falling from such a height with the stones. Timbers and fire were torn under in all shapes of horror, crushed and mangled. Nor was this the end of their miseries. For the street cleaners who were removing the rubbish with axes, macks, and forks, and making the roads passable, tossed with these instruments the dead and the living together into holes in the ground, dragging them along like sticks and stones, and turning them over with their iron tools. Trenches were filled with men. Some who were thrown in head foremost with their legs sticking out of the ground writhed a long time. Others fell with their feet downward and their heads above ground. Horses ran over them, crushing their faces and skulls, not purposely on the part of the riders, but in their headlong haste. Nor did the street cleaners do these things on purpose, but the tug of war, the glory of approaching victory, the rush of soldiery, The orders of the officers, the blast of the trumpets, tribunes and centurions marching their cohorts hither and thither all together, made everybody frantic and heedless at the spectacles under their eyes. It's difficult to read a passage like this and not be moved. This was a scene of unimaginable brutality. A moment when the gods of mercy had utterly abandoned the Carthaginians to a foe which had shed all vestiges of its humanity to become the very incarnation of death itself. It's a scene of hell on earth, one which would be repeated over and over again in this final chapter of the siege. Ion reports, quote, 6 days and nights were consumed in this kind of fighting, the soldiers being changed so that they would not be worn out with toil, slaughter, want of sleep in these horrid sights. Scipio alone toiled without rest, hurrying here and there without sleep, taking food while he was at work until utterly fatigued and relaxed, he sat down on a high place where he could overlook the efforts. From such heights, the commander would have been able to surveil not just the Bursa Hill, but also the surrounding districts of the Grand City. Taking these would require similarly grueling urban warfare. It is said that Scipio estimated the fighting might stretch on for many more days to completely extinguish the enclaves of survivors. But one way or the other, he was determined to see things through. Carthage must be destroyed. For the defenders, the bleak inevitability of their doom was all too apparent. No quarter was being given. Every inch taken by the Romans drove them closer to oblivion. Without a doubt, the city was lost. And if nothing was done, so too would its people. Thus it was that on the 7th day of hell, the surviving leadership of Carthage atop the Bursa Hill finally offered to surrender. From its hallowed doors emerged an embassy. They bore olive branches and sacred garlands of Asclepius. These descended through the ruins of the city in a grim procession to the Roman lines. Here they were met by Scipio. While the conqueror had thus far shown a monstrous appetite for violence, he was also capable of mercy. The appeals to save the lives of the Carthaginian citizens was granted. 50,000 men, women, and children now emerged from the gate of the Bursa. Under the careful watch of guards, these were escorted to the rear of the siege lines. However, not all were granted clemency. In particular were the nearly 1,000 Roman deserters who at one point or another over the 3-year siege had found themselves switching sides. These, we are told, took final refuge within the temple complex of Asclepius with the general Hasdrubal and his family. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, the oath-breakers would find themselves betrayed. In secret, Hasdrubal slipped from their sides to that of the Romans, begging for his life. Thereupon, Scipio had him brought before the temple to kneel at his feet in full view of the deserters and his own family. Scipio then quieted his troops, giving time for the last offenders to hurl the most vile of curses and insults at the emasculated general. It was a calculated, humiliating act of dominance. This ritual of conquest culminated with the remaining Carthaginians making one last act of resistance. They now set fire to the Temple of Asclepius, the very heart and soul of the city, to deny the Romans a chance to claim its loot all their lives. In this raging funeral, P of a once great empire stood the defiant wife of Hasdrubal. Ion records her final words. For you, Roman, the gods have no cause of indignation, since you exercise the right of war. Upon this Hasdrubal, betrayer of his country and her temples, of me and his children, may the gods of Carthage take vengeance, and you be their instrument. Then turning to Hasdrubal, "Wretch!" she exclaimed. "Traitor, most effeminate of men. This fire will entomb me and my children. Will you, the leader of great Carthage, decorate a Roman triumph? Ah, what punishment will you not receive from him at whose feet you are now sitting?" Having reproached him thus, she slew her children, flung them into the fire, and plunged in after them. It was over. At long last, the siege of Carthage had ended. The momentous nature of this event was not lost upon Scipio, who feared that one day the same doom would come for Rome. Ion remarks on his thoughts as follows: "Scipio, when he looked upon the city as it was utterly perishing and in the last throes of its complete destruction, is said to have shed tears openly for his enemies after being wrapped in thought for long and realizing that all cities, nations, and authorities must, like men, meet their doom. That this happened to Ilium, once a prosperous city, to the empires of Assyria, Media, and Persia, the greatest of their time, and to Macedonia itself, either deliberately or the verses escaping him, he said, 'A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain.' But as Scipio sat musing of the future, the corpse of Carthage was still warm. What would become of its ruins, of its people, and of its legacy? If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.